You can send HTML emails with file attachments using C# and Fluent Email. In this video, I'll show you exactly how to do that. We'll write C# code to do the following. 1. Send plain text emails using SMTP and your free Gmail account. SMTP stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. 2. Send HTML emails with images and buttons using SMTP and your free Gmail account. 3. Send HTML emails with a PDF file attachment using the same SMTP and your free Gmail account. 4. Send emails with images and buttons using a transactional email provider API. In this instance, we'll use SendGrid. 5. Send HTML emails with a PDF file attachment using a transactional email provider API. And 6. Send a newsletter or bulk HTML emails with images using a transactional email provider. Now, in this video, I'll cover almost all the common email sending scenarios. So not only can you just copy and reuse the code here, but you can now do it like a pro, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how everything works. Now, as you can see, I make programming videos like this one. So before we proceed, please scroll down and click the red subscribe button so that you'll be notified whenever I post a new video like this one. Okay, so let's write some code now. Let's start by creating a brand new project in Visual Studio 2019. Here, I'm going to select ASP.NET Core Web Application as our project template. And I'm going to name the application Beautiful Mailer. And I'll click Create. On this screen, you can see that I have ASP.NET Core 5.0 as my framework of choice. If you don't have this, you can head over now and download and install it before you come back, and we'll continue together. I'm going to enable Rezo runtime compilation. That way, if we modify any of our views, we don't need to restart the application before we see the changes we've made. Okay, so I'm going to click Create, and it will take a little moment and my application will be ready. Now our project is ready. So the next thing we need to do is to add the Fluent Email package to our application using the NuGet package manager. To do that, I'll just right click on the project name and select Manage NuGet Packages. Okay, I'm going to click on Browse and I'll type Fluent Email. Okay, so all the packages you see in orange are libraries that are part of this Fluent Email package. Broadly, these packages can be categorized into 3. The first categories are the core libraries, and the core libraries are made up of fluentemail.core and fluentemail.smtp. The fluentemail.core is made up of the domain model. It is like the foundation upon which all the other packages are built. The fluentemail.smtp is used to send emails using an SMTP server. For example, when you want to use your personal Gmail to send out emails, or when you want to use your custom domain email server to send out emails. For instance, my personal domain is maxcodingspot.com. Now, on this domain, I have an SMTP server which handles all emails sent from and to that domain. So I can use one of the email addresses on this domain to send out emails using C# and Fluent Email using the SMTP package. The second category are the renderers. Renderers are libraries which you can use to send beautiful HTML templated emails, right? Okay, there are 2 renderers in this package. The first one is the fluentemail.rezo. This generates emails using the Rezo templating engine. the .NET MVC uses Razor as its HTML templating engine. So basically, everything you can do with .NET MVC Razor, you can do it here. The other renderer is the Fluent email.liquid. Yeah, right here. It generates emails using liquid templates. The final category is the mail provider integrations. So typically when you're sending out lots of emails from an application, it's not possible to use your private Gmail account to do that because it can only allow you to send about 100 to 150 emails per day. Now this restriction applies to many other SMTP providers as well. So the typical option is to subscribe to bulk email providers such as Mailgun or SendGrid. So the packages in this category can be used to send emails using these providers. And these packages include fluentemail.mailgun, fluentemail.sendgrid, fluentemail.mailkit, and fluentemail.mailtrap. In this tutorial, we'll install and use the fluentemail.smtp, that's to send out emails using Gmail, and then we'll also install fluentemail.razor to enable us send out beautiful HTML emails. And finally, we'll use fluentemail.sendgrid to demonstrate how you can send emails using a provider's API. So let's go ahead and install the packages we just mentioned. Accept the terms and conditions. We'll also install fluentemail.razor. Finally, we'll install fluentemail.sendgrid. Let's accept the terms and conditions. And then we're done. Alright, so let's go ahead and close the NuGet package manager. Okay, so now we have our project all set up and let's send out our first email. Now, in this first instance, we'll send a simple plain text email using Gmail. But before you can send out an email using Gmail, there's something you need to do. You need to enable less secure app access on your Gmail account. So let me quickly show you how to do that. To enable less secure app access on your Gmail account, you need to go to myaccount.gmail.com. Okay, so here's myaccount.google.com. What you need to do is click on the security tab and scroll to the bottom of the page towards here. So less secure app access, you can see it here is off and you need to turn it on. So let's click on this. Now note that Google says this is not recommended. So generally, if you're using your Gmail for test, after you're done with your test, you should come back and disable this less secure app access. And I'm going to enable it for this my account. This account is maxcodingspot@gmail.com. Okay, so I've enabled it and that's all I need to do here. I can now close my browser and get back to my solution. Okay, so for the first email we'll send, we're going to send it right out of our home controller from the index action method. Okay, so let's type our code here. So the first thing we need to do is to create our sender object. So let's create it. Var sender is equal to new SMTP sender Okay, so our SMTP sender is in our fluentemail.smtp, and we can import that namespace by clicking here and selecting using fluentemail.smtp. Now what we need to do here is to make a lambda expression and new SMTP client like this. The SMTP client is part of the system.net.mail namespace, so let's import that namespace. And then the first parameter we are supposed to pass into this is the host, that is supposed to the host for the SMTP client. So in this instance, we are going to pass in smtp.gmail.com. All right, so the other parameters for this class are the use default credentials, and we're not going to use default credentials, so this is false. The next one is the port. Now the standard port for secure SMTP on Gmail is 587, so let's type that here. The next thing is the credentials that we're going to use. So when you are trying to send the emails, what are the credentials that the system is going to use to be able to send the emails from our Gmail account? So we're going to say new network credentials, Now this network credentials class is found in the system.net namespace, so let's import the system.net network credentials, and then we open this and pass the network credentials inside. For this sample email we are sending, I'm going to use max coding spot@gmail.com as the email from where I'm going to send out our email. Now we are supposed to supply the password here, and I'm going to type this. This is just a placeholder, it's not my actual password, and but in your case you have to enter your exact password. And then the final thing we need to set here is whether we need to use SSL for this. So let's type enable SSL is equal to true. We are going to use SSL because we have it anyway by default in our .NET application, the new application we just created. So now that we've set up our sender, the next thing we need to do now is to actually send out the email using Fluent Email. Okay, so email, and this is not, you still don't have this here. Click here and you can see where the email class is located. So it is in the fluentemail.core namespace, and then I have it like this: email.default_sender. So the first thing I'm supposed to do is to specify the sender for our email, and then the sender is the sender that I just created above, right? Okay, so so the next thing we're supposed to do is to define our actual email. That's the email, the message we want to send out. Okay, so let's do that by saying email is equals to email, the email object we just defined above, and this this class has these Fluent functions that we can just keep using. So from, and you need to define the from email. So I'm just going to copy the email I defined above. Now have it here. One parameter I always think you should add, which makes your emails look beautiful, is the name of the sender. So here I'm going to use Ask Coding Spot as the name of the sender. Like we said, these are just fluent methods, and then I can add another method too, and then I'll define too. I'm going to send this email to another of my emails, which is Gmail. That's kumak@gmail.com. Same thing with the from email. You can also define the name of the recipient here. So let me just type my name here. The next thing to define is the subject. So let's define the subject here, and let's say the subject is hello there. And finally, we need to define the body of our message. So the body. Now remember that what we are doing here is we are sending out a plain text email. So we need to put it in the quotes and say this is a plain text email, a plain text message using Gmail. All right, so we have our email properly set. The next thing we're going to do at this point is just to send it. So we can use await. All right, we want to send this email asynchronously, but our action method is not asynchronous. So what we are supposed to do at this point is to turn it into an async method. So let's just turn this to async task, and then all right, so with this we can use await, can use an awaiter, await email dot send async. All right, so this is all we need to send out an email. However, I think it's a good practice that when I'm sending out emails for the first time, I generally want to put my email sending the section that's the code section that specifically sends out the email. I try to put it in an error handling code. That way, if there's any error, I'll be able to catch it and see what the error is. So let's just do that. Let's do try await email. So let's just drag this into here and let's catch exception E. We are not really going to do anything with this exception. All I want is to put a breakpoint here in case if there's any exception in sending our email, we can always read what the exception is and fix it. All right, so this is all we need to send our email. Let's run our application and see what happens. Okay, this is going to take a little bit because it's the first time we're building our application, and then this code is going to run the code within the index method because that's our entry point into our application. So the code within the index action is going to run, and before it returns the view, it is going to send out our email. So let's check. Let's wait and see what happens. Okay, so we have an error here, and let me see what the error is. The SMTP server requires a secure connection to the client, or the client was not authenticated. Okay, what's the problem here? Oh, okay, yeah, that's it. So my password is not correct. So I'm going to go off screen and I'm going to type in my correct password, and then I'll run the application again. Okay, so let me stop the application. And now that I've entered the correct password, let me run our application again. So I click debug, and let's wait and see what happens. So our application has successfully built and it has run without any errors. Now let me check my Gmail to see if we've received the email that we just sent. So I'm going to go to gmail.com, and right, so that's the email we just sent. Okay, let me just quickly show this. So when we enabled less secure applications access, this was the email Google sent to us. So like I said, always remember to go back and disable it again. But here is the email that we sent from our from the application we are working on right now. Okay, so now that we've successfully sent out our first email, we need to refactor our application a little bit. So we're going to refactor three things about this application. Now, the first thing we're going to refactor or rewrite is these values which we are defining here. So currently we are hard coding these values, such as the sender's email, the sender's name, the password, maybe the port. So some of these values may need to change, after we deploy our application, and we don't need to have to recompile our application again before we can deploy it with new values like this. So to do that, what we need to do is move all of these values that may change in production to our app settings file, and then we're going to define all of those values. We're going to move them from our home controller to this place so that we can reuse them in other places, and we can change it even when we've deployed our application without having to recompile. All right, so the first thing I need to define is our sender's name, and I'm going to place it inside this. I'm going to say mail, and I'm going to say from. So that's the sender's name, and I'll say Max coding spot. That's the sender. The next thing I need to define is the Gmail settings. So stuff like the sender's email, the password, and the port. So I'm going to put it inside here. I'll say Gmail, and place it here, and I'll say sender. That's the email of the sender. Let me do Max coding spot at gmail.com. The next value here is the password. So for the password here, I'm not going to expose my password here. Instead, I'm going to use just this asterisk, and I'm going to come back and modify them before we run our application. The final thing I need to do here is to create the port entry. So for the port could change, and so for the port, I'm going to use the default secure port for Gmail, and that's this. So these are the settings I need to move from our home controller to the settings, to the app settings file. Okay, so the next thing we're going to refactor is this sender. So the creation of this sender, currently what we are doing is we are creating this sender in this action method. Now, assuming we are going to be sending out an email from, let's say, the privacy action here, what's going to happen is we'll have to create the same sender in that place. Now, if we have 20 places where we're going to be sending out emails, we'll have to keep duplicating that code, the sender code, this code that creates the senders. So we can do better than that. We can move the entirety of this code into our startup class, and actually Fluent email was built in such a way that it will allow us to use the default .NET dependency injection, so to create our SMTP sender in a single place and pass it on to our entire application. To do that, let's open our Solution Explorer and click on our Startup class. Now, we need to define our dependency injection code in our services method. So the first thing we're going to need for us to be able to create this class, we are going to need these values. So the port, the sender email, the password, and probably the sender's name. Now, all the values we need to create our dependency injection code, we've already defined them in the app settings file. So what we're going to do is just to read these values from our startup class. So let's do that. The first thing we need from the app settings file is the sender's name. So let's say var from is equal to configuration. Okay, so this configuration has already been passed to us here. It has been injected into our startup class, so we can just use it to read sections or to read anything that we want from our app settings file. So let's do that, and this is how we're going to read that section. If I come here, so I define it within this email section, and then inside this from, so I'm going to say email, and then the specific section I want from the email is the from. Okay, so the next thing I need to import is the sender's email. So let's do that. For Gmail sender is equal to configuration dot get section, and I defined it within Gmail and sender. So let me do that. Configuration dot get section Gmail, and it is the sender. The next value I require from that is the password. So Gmail password is equal to configuration dot get section, and is in the Gmail section, and the particular part I want is the password, right? Okay, so next The next part is the port. I believe, yeah, that's the port. So let me just do Gmail port is equal to, okay, so the port is defined as an integer. So if you look at the rest of these values were defined inside the quote mark, so they are strings, but this is defined as an integer, so I need to convert it to an integer. So let's just convert dot to integer 32, and then configuration dot get section, and the section I'm looking for is still the Gmail, and the specific part is the port. All right, so with this I have everything I need for these values. So I'm bringing in these values from the app settings file. The next thing we need to do, what we are actually trying to do, is to create this sender inside of our startup class. That way we can just receive the sender here somewhere in the index method here, and every other place that we need that sender. So our code effectively starts from here, right? Okay, so let's go there and create our sender. Okay, so like we said, Fluent Email allows you, the Fluent Email package allows you to create, to inject all of the configurations that you need to send an email directly into our startup class. Okay, so to do this, these are the things that we need to add to our services. So services, the first thing I need to create is add Fluent email, right? This is the sender's email, right? So what I'm going to have here is the Gmail sender. That's the email from our app settings file, and then the next thing is the from field, right? So I have this, and the next thing, okay, so we are not using this right now, but we are going to use it to send our HTML email. So let's just add the renderer. So what we are saying is that we'll be using the Razor renderer. Remember when we talked about renderer and we added the package? So we are going to use the Razor renderer. It doesn't accept any parameters. And then the next one we're going to do is to add the SMTP sender, right? That's the code that we have here in our controller here, and that's what we're going to define here. So let's add that. So our new SMTP client. Okay, so we can just remove this and add the using statement. And so our new SMTP client, and the first argument we are supposed to pass is the host. So let's pass in smtp.gmail.com. Okay, and we open this object. Let's close it out here, and then We can come here and copy everything we have here, use default credentials and everything here. So let's just copy what we have here, and then I'll just paste it here. Use this is false. The port, I'll replace this value because we are no longer hard coding anything here. So I'll replace the value with the Gmail port, and let's import this using system.net. So here I'll replace this with the IMailSender. So IMailSender, and the password part, I'll replace it with Gmail password, right? And enable SSL is true. Yeah, so right, so this is everything we need for us to be able to inject this sender into our entire application, and then we can just reuse it from our home controller. So with this done, let's save our file and let's come back to our index method. Now I'm going to do something. I'm going to comment out everything that we have here, and I'll show you how we can utilize that. We can utilize the code that we defined here in this services section in this place. So let me just comment out this, and now what we are supposed to do to be able to consume what we created in the settings file is to accept from services. So from services, this comes with .NET framework. So from services, and I say Fluent email. So it's an interface, is a Fluent email interface, and then let me just call it mailer, right? With this defined, I can come here now and create and send my email. So what I can do here is var email is equal to, now because we are receiving, so what we had done here was we created these values by directly calling on this email class, right? But what we need to do now is we're passing in this interface as mailer, which we have created inside here. We are passing it into this action method. So what I need to do here is to just call, is to receive this mailer, and I can now continue with everything else that is here. So so let me just paste this here and uncomment this. The only thing I cannot define here is the from, right? Because we've already defined it in our services. This is the line that defines that. So let me come back here and I'll remove the from. So all I need is the to, and I'm using the same there. Now this title, let's say hello there from DI, right? From dependency injection, and I leave everything the same. The final piece of code is just to send my email, right? So I've defined it and I just do like this, and that's all. So let's run our application and see if it works. Okay, so I'm having an SMTP exception. Oh, the client was not authenticated. Okay, so I think I know what's happening. So I'm going to go, I'm going to cover this side of the code, and I'm just going to type in my password. So my password is not correct. So let me just type it. So now that I have my password typed in, my correct password typed in, let me run our application again to see if this works. Okay. Right. So we have our application running, which means nothing was broken. Now let's open our Gmail and see if we've received the email we are expecting. Right, that's it here. Okay, so you can see. Okay, so hello there from DI. There's a little issue here. So the sender's name, we're using, I think I used the wrong thing here. But anyway, this is it, and we've received our email from DI. So this is how you use the dependency injection. Oh, let's close our browser. Let's stop the application and let's get back to this. So looking at this, let's go over what we've done here. Okay, so now we're passing in this object, the sender, into our controller action, and then we are receiving it using from services, and that's the interface that defines this email sending functionality, and then we just use that interface that we've received by dependency injection, and we are able to send our email without any issues. Right. Okay, so this is the second part of our refactoring, and now let's look at the third thing we need to refactor. So the final thing we need to refactor is this. Are we supposed to be sending our email from this index action? Okay, I think we need to move our email sending code out of the index action method, because in the model view controller pattern or MVC pattern, controller actions should not be sending emails, separation of concerns. So as a matter of good practice, the less code you have in your action methods, the better. So this code here belongs somewhere else, not inside this this action method. Now to refactor this code and move it out of our index method, let's go to our Solution Explorer and let's create a new folder. Add folder, new folder. Let's call it utils. So just utilities, right? And inside this utils folder, let's create an interface. So we want to use the dependency injection that is given to us by .NET Framework. So we can add a new item, and here we're going to add an interface. So let's call this interface, let's call it IMailSender, sender. So it's an interface that is going to just define the methods that we need. Let's make it a public interface, and here let's define all the functions that we'll need to send out emails, right? Now if you remember in our introduction, we said we were going to send a plain text email using Gmail. We're going to send a HTML email using Gmail. We're going to send a HTML email with file attachments using Gmail. So let's create this these methods. So let's create them. Send plain text, send plain text like this, send plain text Gmail. So this just, we're trying to use something that is descriptive, right? And this method is going to accept two parameters, and those parameters are the string, let's say recipient email, and another parameter, string recipient name, right? Okay, so I'll just duplicate this and create two more actions and create two more methods, and this would be send HTML email using Gmail. This one is to send HTML with attachment using Gmail, right? Now, in our introduction, we said we're going to send emails also using a transactional email provider's API. So we can just copy all the three and duplicate them here and send plain text. Okay, so we are going to use SendGrid. Let's just enter SendGrid. We're going to send HTML using SendGrid. Same thing, SendGrid. And we're going to send HTML with attachment using SendGrid. But there's a final email we said we're going to send, and that is to send bulk emails, right? So we said we'll send, okay, let me just duplicate this, and we said we'll send bulk send, let me try to give it a descriptive name, SendGrid bulk. Okay. Okay, so if we are sending bulk email, we cannot accept a single email. Rather, we'll accept a list of emails. So let's just use enumerable of string. Okay, so let's call it recipient emails. So here for this test, we're not going to use the names. We'll just take their emails and send it to them, right? Okay, so this is the interface we need to create, and now let's implement this interface, right? So I'll just copy the name, and in the utils folder I'll add a new class which is going to implement the interface we just created, and I'll call it MailSender, right? By default is a public class. What I need here is to implement the interface, right? So I'm implementing that interface. I can just click here and say implement interface. So on this small fly out, and I say implement interface. So we have all of our code that we've created, right? We are having HTML, Gmail. Let me quickly rearrange this by copying this, pasting it here. So in the order in which we've wanted to send our email. So the first is plain text, then HTML, then HTML with attachment, right? Okay. So let's just take care of these three first. Okay. So now that we have this, the next thing we need to do is to write the code that will actually send out these emails. Okay, so in our home controller, we were able to access iFluent email interface from the services like this, because everything I inherit controller will have direct access to this from services method, right? But in our classes, we will not be able to do that. So we have to find another way to access this interface. Okay, so the way we can access our services which have been created in this our startup class is by using another interface that is provided by the system namespace, right? Okay, that is, and we can use dependency injection here. So let me just create it here. Private read only I service provider, and then I can call it service provider, right? This is the convention outside here, and we are using the constructor injection pattern. So we'll have to create a constructor like this: public mail sender, that's the constructor for this, and then we inject iService provider as service provider like this, and we do service provider is equal to service provider, right? So now we have access to the service provider, so all the services which are defined within this iServices collection in the startup class, right? Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to now utilize this service provider that we've created. So let's start by duplicating exactly what we did here. So sending this email, let's try to send it out exactly here in this send Plaintext Gmail. So what we are going to do here is to use the using directive, so that way whatever we are using inside this using directive will be disposed for us by .NET. So let's do scope is equal to the service provider that we created here, and then we're going to create scope. Now we need to create scope. We need to import this namespace using Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection. Okay, so we have it, create scope, right? And let's open this. And so now what we can do here is var mailer. We are trying to access this mailer that we created here, right? Okay, so var mailer is equal to scope dot service provider dot get required service, and I fluent. The interface that is used for this is the Fluent email interface. All right, we need to import this the fluent email.core, and then we have it like this. Okay, so with this we can obtain this fluent email interface, which in our home controller we were accessing using from services, but because from services is not available for us in a class, we have to use this method. We have to use this way to access it. Now that we have this interface, the next thing we need to do is for email is equal to, actually we can just copy everything that we have here. Let me just copy this and I'll comment this out. So let's come here and I'll just paste it here, right? Okay, so we cannot use this, we cannot await this the send async, because this is not an awaitable action. So we need to change this into an async method, and then so we have public async this, and then we have that. So we are still sending the same email from di. Let me just change this in class, right? Let's just do this. This is a plain text email. Okay, so this is everything we need to send out our email, except we have this class and then the interface, but we've not connected it in any way. So our application would not know how it is supposed to link this, how it is supposed to map this to this, right? So what we need to do is to go back to our startup class, and we need to add this services. We need to wire up this, right? Dot we can add as a scoped or a transient, but let's add as a scoped. Add scoped, and then we can say IMailSender. Let's import it here and wire it up to the mail sender, right? Mail sender class, right? So with this we have everything we need to be able to send our email. So we can look back here, and yes, so we have everything we need to be able to send our email, right? But we are not calling this method yet. So let's go back to our home controller, and we have to use dependency injection to inject this, what we have set up here into the home controller, so that way we are able to like call it. Okay, so here we have the logger. We are actually not using this, so we can just change it to, let's just delete this and have it as read only IMailSender mail sender, and let's import it. And then we have okay, mail sender, and here we have, let's do the same thing here. Okay, so our mail sender here, we can copy this and just replace this with this. Okay, yeah, so we've injected our interface into this. Now with this injection, we would be able to call the methods here, so the functions here to send an email. So let's call this function, let's say underscore mail sender dot send plaintext Gmail. This is the function we've implemented, and then it has to it receives two parameters, right? It has two parameters. So let's say the recipient email, let's use my email here at gmail.com, and the name is Mark Melton. Right, so because we implemented this as a void, so it doesn't return anything. We do not have to await anything here, so we can just pass it and forget about it, right? Okay, so here okay, so with this setup, we can now run our application and see if this works. Okay, so let me debug our application and let's see the result. So our application has successfully run, and now what we need to do is to check if our email was received, right? So I'm going to go to Gmail, and right, so here we have it. Hello there from DI in class. This was from the first DI. This was the first plain text, and this is from our DI class. I mean, from the class, the interface and the class we just implemented. All right, so let me close this. Now, so what we've just done is we've moved all of our email sending code from inside of this action method, right, to a different class, right? So the index method can now be a pure index method, right? Now, because we are not awaiting anything here, we might as well just change it back into an action result, right? Because we are not awaiting anything, and we no longer need this here, right? So that's that. So with this, we have refactored our email sending code, and we've moved it into its own class or its own area, right? And now with this we can continue. Now with this we can implement the rest of these methods that we've created here. So we still have sending HTML emails, sending emails with attachments, and all of these other things. So we are not done yet. All right, so let's do that. Let's start implementing our HTML emails from Gmail. Okay, so before we send our HTML emails, let me quickly say this, right? Okay, so many of the examples you see using Fluent Email or other email sending libraries tend to show a way of constructing HTML within code, right? So inside your code, you are constructing HTML. Now, in real life applications, that's not how you usually send HTML emails. Usually, what you do is you have a physical HTML template file that you will use to send your emails. But the truth is, creating HTML templates for emails is not a very easy task, mainly because HTML email templates are not like regular web page HTML, right? So in a typical web page, we create a HTML file and then we add CSS to it to make it more beautiful, and then usually the CSS file is an external file, right, that we link, right? Almost all browsers, or let me say all browsers, understand properly how to interpret CSS. But that's not the same with email clients. There are so many email clients out there. Some of them support external CSS files, some of them don't. Some of them support inline CSS files. Some of them don't even support all the CSS rules that are out there, right? So, for instance, you may find that Gmail supports a different set of or a subset of CSS than what Yahoo does, and then you may find that Outlook supports a different set of CSS rules or formatting rules, and that may be different from Thunderbird or Yandex Mail, and so on. So long story short, we are not going to create a template, a HTML email template from the ground up in this tutorial. Instead, what we're going to do is we'll download a free template online, right, from a professional website that does that, and we will use that template to send our HTML emails. So let me quickly switch and show you how we can get that email template. So what we're going to do is we'll use this dispatch.io. They have very beautiful emails there, and you can buy some if you want, but we're going to get one of their free email templates, right? And this is the address, the web address we're going to use. We're going to use a particular email template called Oxygen, right? So I'm going to copy this this web address, and I'm going to paste it here, this URL, and I'll paste it here, right? And so this is like a playground that allows you to construct your HTML email templates. So to do that, what you can just do is drag this. I'm dragging the header, right? So I've dragged the header from here to here. These are the blocks, and I'm going to drag. Okay, let me drag this invite. We're going to use this invite. Let me also drag the footer, right? Okay, so we're going to also use this footer, right? And what you can do here, which we are not going to do, is you can right click on any of these regions, and then you will see the text that makes up that. and you can replace the text with your own text, right? So I can, for instance, say this is a test email from me, and you can see that what I'm typing is coming here. And let's change the button text. Let's call it click here. Click here, and you can set the URL for it, so you just copy it from anywhere and set it. Also, you can set the images here. So if you look at this image, this logo that we have here this is where it's coming from. If you have your own logo, you can just copy the URL for it and then paste it here, and it's going to appear here. The same thing with the social icons that we have here, and then you can see the footer, what it is. We can change it to Max Coding Spot. And then once we are done with that, what we need to do is click on the export button. It's going to ask you to enter your first name, last name, and email. Let's just do that. So I'm going to just do this, and I'll leave it as yes, and I'll say get HTML template. Now this is the HTML template that we need to be able to send like beautiful HTML emails. So I'm going to click on copy, and then it is copied, right? And let me minimize this, let me close this, and let me go back to our application. Now here I'm going to come to the Solution Explorer, and in the www root folder, let's create another folder called emails. Inside of this emails folder, let's create a file. I'm going to add a new item, and I'm going to create a razor page, an empty razor page or a razor view, whichever one you choose is going to work. So I'm going to create an empty one, and I'll call it sample dot, yeah, that will do, and I'll say add, right? Now here what I'm going to do is I'll delete out the code and paste in the code I've copied from that website, right? So if you look at it, you'll see that the structure of HTML templates is a little bit different from the regular websites you are used to. The regular web pages you are used to, but that's fine. That's how emails work. Now, okay, so we are having errors here, right? Okay, so the reason we are having these errors is because when you use the @ symbol, .NET or Razor, the Razor templating engine will interpret it as something, that will interpret it, for instance, like a model. So it's supposed to be a model or something, something that is coming from a value that is coming from a model. But that's not what we have here. In order to fix this, you can add another @ symbol in front of all the places where an @ symbol appears, and then this is still going to work, but then we will not have any errors. Without doing this, you won't be able to compile and run the application. Now, not all email templates come with this, really. So I think this is unique. This is just something that has to do with the template that we've got. So with this fixed, we have like everything we need. I can see another error here, so let me just come here and double click and okay, and see where the error is at first name. Okay, let's just do this. Now, okay, before we fix this, let me say something. And so before we fix this, let me just show you something, right? Okay, so when you're dealing with you know, you can use a model. You can use a model for all views, razor views, right? But if you don't have a model, or you don't know your model ahead of time, one thing you can do is you can use a dynamic model, right? Okay, so this is how you use a dynamic model. You just say add model dynamic, right? So this way you don't have to know the fields of this model, you know, the dynamic feature in C#, right? So you don't have to know the model, the fields that make up this model ahead of time. Now with this, you have a valid model for this view. So what we can do here is, let's come back to where our error is, and instead of having this, we can say at model dot name. So this way, what we are doing is, when we are going to be sending the email, we'll send a value called name, right, to this view, and then the Razor templating engine is going to replace this text with whatever value we have as name. Now, that is the same way you're going to be creating content that is that's the same way you're going to be creating your other content which would come from your application. So for instance, inside of this span, what I have is that message that you remember, so this was the message that we added, and that's like the body of this email, right? Now if we were sending that from our code, what we'll have will be something like at model dot message, or dot body, or whatever it is. But here we're just going to reuse what is here. I mean, we're going to just use the verbatim text that is here, and we are not going to pass the text from our application code. So with this, our template is ready, right? So let's close this file and let's go back to our mail sender here, and let's implement sending out this email using this HTML email. Basically, the code is the same with this. I'm going to just copy this code and paste it here, right? And okay, so let's make our method an async method, async void, and this is it. But when you're sending a HTML email, and if we're constructing the HTML in code, then we'll have this body, and then we'll construct the email, the HTML within it. But this is not what we are doing here. We already have a template on disk that we are going to use, right? So instead of doing this, instead of sending this body, what we're going to do is, let me delete it out, and then I'll say hello there, HTML, just so that we'll distinguish this email when we send it. And here, instead of body, we'll say using template from file. Okay, no, not this. So we'll have using template from file, right? And we'll open it. And now what we need to do is to tell our method where that template is located, right? So we can do this by using directory. We need to import this namespace here, right? It should be in system.io. So we have directory dot get current directory. So we want to start from the current directory, and our current directory is not utils. Our current directory is beautiful mailer. So that's the directory where we currently are, because when we compile all of this code is going to sit here, right? Okay. Okay, so current directory, and then now starting from our current directory, let's move up and let's drill in, and www root, right? We're trying to find where we stored our emails, right? www root slash emails slash sample dot cs html. Yep, that's where our file is located, right? And you need to pass in a new object for. So when you are working with using template, you need to pass in a new object. Now that object is remember the dynamic model that we created in the view, right? This dynamic model, right? This dynamic model. Now we're going to supply this model. If you have this file, I think you can go ahead and delete it. We don't need it. This code behind file, right? So this dynamic object, so we create an object like this. New object. Let's format our code like this, and now the only thing we defined there was the name, right? So is a dynamic, so we can just say name is equal to recipient name here. Yep. Yeah, and that's all. So what we are doing is, let's recap. We're, instead of supplying the body of our email, we are saying that we are going to use a file, a template file, right? And we are telling this method that the file we're going to use is located in the www root under emails, and the name is sample.cs html, right? And then we are passing in a dynamic object, and the only fields that we are providing is the name field, and then we are passing in this recipient name that we are receiving from wherever this method is going to be called. So with this, we are done. Yes, we are done with this method, and we can save our file and go back to the home controller, right? So let me just copy out this the name of this method, and I can go back to the controller. Let me comment out this, and I'll say mailer, okay, mailSender dot, and the name of that method that I copied, and let me pass in the values which are required. I'll just reuse everything within here, and that's that, right? So with this in place, we can run our application and see if it works. Okay, so let's run our application, and so our application has compiled successfully, and with this we can go to our email. So let me open okay, so we still have this, sorry about that. Let me go to Gmail and see if we've received the email that we just sent. Perfect. So that's it here. So if we open it, that's the HTML email we just created now, and that's the email we sent. So you can see everything that we sent, and you can see that we passed the name into the dynamic object, and we used Razor syntax to replace that code with the actual name that we sent, and then you can see that everything is working. So we have our images and everything. Now, speaking about images, let me just say this, right? You can attach an image to the email you are sending, but in my experience, that's not the best practice. Okay, so if I have a website and I want to send emails out, what I probably would do is I have my logo on my website or on whatever website, or I just get any other hosting somewhere that hosts images, and so all of my images are somewhere already online, and then with that I can now send my emails, and it is the links to the images that I'm actually sending. And when the email client that displays this email opens up, it just fetches the images from wherever they are online, and then we have it. So this is what we've just done, and then we have their email, right? So let's close our let's go back to our application and see all we've done, right? So this is our email sender, and here you can see that we've successfully sent this email, right? So with this, we've covered two scenarios for Gmail. The last part that is left is sending out an email with attachment, right? Now to do that, we're just going to copy the same code that we have here, and we'll just paste it here, right? And let me make this an async method. So what we are going to do here is we're going to send a PDF attachment, a PDF file, right? And to do that, we have to get the PDF somewhere. So let's just go online right now and free. Okay, I'll just search for sample PDF, sample PDF, right? Okay, let's just look for another PDF, right? So this looks about fine, and I'm going to download it, and I'll cut it and paste it somewhere inside my solution, right? So let me just come to www.root and I'll add a new folder and I'll call it files. You can give it a more appropriate name, right? And I'm going to paste the sample.pdf that I've just downloaded, right? So with that, we need to add the code. So with this done, what we need now is to write the code which will attach this file that we've just downloaded here, this sample PDF, right? And so let's do that. So I can just put my code here and say, now Fluent Email offers another Fluent function, and that is attach from file name. So let me just copy this and I'll change this code, right? So instead of emails here, what I have is files and sample.pdf, right? Now with this, I need to specify what kind of I need to specify the content type, right? Okay, so here I'm going to, okay, I need to close this, and the content type, so the content type is going to be, you can see that it is required here, but I don't have to specify it. But let me just do, I'm going to specify the content type as application/PDF. That's the content type for PDF. There's one final parameter that I may specify, and I think it's a good practice that you should specify that, and that's the name of the file. So when it shows up in the recipient's email, what is the name of that file? How is it? What is the name that the person is going to see? If you don't specify this, usually is going to use the path. So the path that was here is going to use everything here as the name of the file. I think that exposes too much about your application and it's not a good practice. So let's do that. So let's do that. I'm going to call it sample. Oh no, let me just call it application form, right? So that's about everything I need to write here, and yes, okay, so let me save it. Let's go back to our home controller, right? Let's comment this out and let's send with attachment Gmail, and let's copy everything here and just replace this. So we are still sending to the same email and we are sending this. Now let's go back to our email sender and let's change the title here. Hello there with attachment, right? Let's save it and let's run our application. All right, okay, so we can see here that our application, okay, so we can see here that our application has built successfully, which means probably we've received the email. So let me open my browser and let me go to Gmail, right? we keep doing this. So let me go to gmail.com and let me see. Perfect. So here's the email we just sent, and as you can already see, there's an attachment in the email, right? So you can see the attachment sign there, right? Let me open it. And here's our attachment. So you can see that the name of the file, when we downloaded it, it was sample.pdf, right? But while sending it, we gave it a name, right? And that's the application form. And with this, you can download it, or if you want, you can just open it. And that's the file that we have just attached. Okay, so sending out emails with attachment works. So let's close Gmail and let's stop debugging our application and let's look at this. So we've implemented everything that has to do with Gmail. First, we've sent plain text. Second, we are able to send HTML, templated emails, and then finally we are able to send this with attachment, right? So with that, we are done with sending emails using Gmail, right? Using SMTP. So let me just show this. Now let me just come to package manager and our installed packages, right? So in this place, we had installed these 3 packages, and I said we're going to use each of these from each of the categories that we looked at when we're looking at the categories of the library. So we used SMTP to send emails from Gmail. We used Razor to send HTML templated emails. And now what's left is SendGrid. So we are going to use SendGrid and Razor to send emails using a provider's API. That's SendGrid's API. All right, so let's go and do that. Okay, so now that we're done sending emails using SMTP, let's implement methods, the methods that we need to send emails using SendGrid. In your specific case, you may want to use Mailgun or MailKit or any other API that will allow you to send transactional emails, right? But the process is similar to sending emails using SendGrid, and so I just chose SendGrid, right, for this tutorial. Okay, let me just mention that there are so many reasons why you may want to use transactional email providers as against using your SMTP provider. First, we talked about how Gmail, for instance, will restrict the number of emails you send out to maybe between 100 and 150 from code, that is. And also, this restriction applies to some other SMTP providers, right? So like your typical website, you may have restrictions on that, and you need to check out if those restrictions will allow you to send the number of emails that you want to send in your application, right? Okay, another problem you may encounter with sending emails using SMTP is that some hosting providers do not allow you to open the port for sending SMTP emails. Now, because those ports present vulnerabilities to this hosting provider, so generally some hosting providers don't allow you to do that. For instance, I know that Google Compute will not allow you to send emails from any of their instances using SMTP, right? So in certain production environments, you may want to choose a transactional email provider that will allow you to send emails through an API rather than through an SMTP server. So you won't need to open any SMTP port, you're just calling an API, right? Okay, so with that out of the way, let's look at how you can send emails using SendGrid. Okay, so I chose SendGrid because they have a free package that is actually good. With their free package, you can send a good number of emails and then you can test it out. You need to sign up on SendGrid. You need to verify your sender identity. That's the email you are sending or the domain from where you are sending that email. And then finally, you need to generate API keys. Now, in the description below, I'm going to leave the links to these 3 steps. So first, you sign up to SendGrid. The second link is how to verify your email or how to. The second link is how to verify the sender, and then the final link is just about how to generate your API keys because you're going to need them, right? Okay, so we're not going to go through the process of signing up on SendGrid here. I'll just assume that you follow the links, you follow the description I'll put below, and then you have that. But ultimately, you're going to need a verified sender, which usually is either an email or a domain name, but you can just do an email. And in this example, I'm going to use an email. And then you need to generate the API keys. Just remember that when SendGrid shows you their API keys, you will see it only once. So you need to copy it and save it somewhere. And then we are going to use it here. Now, after you've done that, you've verified your email and you have the API key to send an email using SendGrid, you can come back and then let's pick it up from there, right? Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to go to our Solution Explorer and open our app settings file, where we're going to define those SendGrid values that we need in order to send our email. And for SendGrid, there are basically 2, right? So we'll have, let's define them, SendGrid, and let's have the first one is the sender. That is the email that you verified on SendGrid, either the email or the domain name. And then we have, I'm going to use an email that I've verified on SendGrid, mark@maxcodingsport.com. Now, the next thing you need is the SendGrid key. So let me define it here. SendGrid key, and this is going to be something like SG dot, and then it will have a long string, right? So I'm not going to paste mine here so that you don't reuse it, but that's about all. So before we run our application, I'm going to come here and replace this value with the correct SendGrid key, right? So I've saved it. Now the next thing after this that we need to do is to go to our startup, and the same way that we define this the sender, right? The sender for Gmail, we need to define the sender also for SendGrid. Okay, so I'm going to comment this out, and let's define a sender for SendGrid, right? So services dot and add fluent email, and it's going to be almost the same thing. Okay, so we need to import the settings that we have here. Sorry. Okay, so let's come here and let me just comment this SendGrid, right? And so let's import those keys that we defined there, those values that we defined in the app settings. And so let me say var SendGrid sender is equal to, I'll just copy this and paste just to make this quick, right? And but there I defined it under SendGrid, and it is the sender, right? And let me define the second value, or I can just copy this and paste, and I have SendGrid key, and here I defined it as SendGrid key. Let me be sure that I'm getting that correct. SendGrid key. Yep, I was getting it wrong. Okay, so SendGrid key, SendGrid. All right, so now that we have this, we can define this, right? And in this add fluent email, I'll say SendGrid sender, and from. So I'm simply using this from that we have here. Is the same for both. It's just the name of my company, and so I have from, and here dot add arrays or renderer, and dot add SendGrid sender, right? And that is where I need the SendGrid key, right? So I have it here, SendGrid key, and with this I have injected my SendGrid sender into our services, right? So I can access it wherever I want, right, inside the application. Now with this, let's come back to our email sender and let's implement that. So here I can simply just copy this. It's a plain text, right? I simply just copy this. Okay, before that, let me rearrange this. I'll just move plain text to the top here, just so we reorder it in the way we want to implement it. Then HTML, then with attachment, and finally pop emails, right? All right, okay, so I can come back here and just copy this, come and paste it here, and I need to change this method into an async method. And okay, so it looks like all through we were doing this wrong, because here I'm sending out, here I'm passing these values here, but it looks like I kept reusing the one from the old code. So I'm going to just do this, and it should still work without any modification. If you run this application, it should still work. Okay, so I'm going to just do this, and I'll just say hello Plaintext from SendGrid. Hello Plaintext from SendGrid. Grid, right? And okay, let's do a little something here. Let's say hello there, and plus recipient name plus how are you doing today? All right, okay, so we're just concatenating text, and we'll just send it like this, right? And that's all we need. This is going to work exactly the same way as with sending using SMTP, right? So let me come back to this controller, and I'll just comment this out, and I'll just do mailer. Okay, sorry, I'll just do mailer mail sender dot, let me paste what I have, and I'll pass in the same thing here, and then we can run our application and see what happens, right? Okay, so let's run our application and see. Oops, this is not going to work because I've not replaced my key. So I'm just going to stop it because I know I've not replaced it with my key, and I'll go. So I'm just going to go off a bit, and I'm going to replace in the app settings. I'm going to paste in my correct key. So I've done that, and let's run our application and see what happens. Okay, so our application is running successfully. Let's go to Gmail and see if we received an email. Perfect. So that's it. So here it is, and we've received our plain text email from the SendGrid function that we just implemented. So you can see here the text we did. Hello there, Mark Melton. How are you doing today? All right. Okay. So this is working, and we can just close this and stop running our application and go back and implement the rest of the senders here, right? So they are basically the same. So if I just copy everything here and paste it here, this should work without any modification. Hello there, SendGrid. Hello there. Let me just add SendGrid HTML, and I make this a sync. This should work. And the same way, I can just copy with attachment and paste it here. Hello there, SendGrid with attachment, and this should just work the way it is, right? Okay, now the final one, and a bit of an interesting one, is this. So this is a situation where okay, so the final method we're going to implement is sending like bulk emails, right? Now typically you don't. Now the final one we are going to implement here is sending bulk emails. Now typically you would hope that you don't have to actually send bulk emails from code like this, because you can just go over to SendGrid, create templates there, use it and send emails and receive. There are other things you get by using their own interface, right? So you can check out deliveries, you can check out like the open rate, you can check out a lot of things from there, right? And it's just easier. You just put your emails on Excel and then you just send it from SendGrid. However, if you absolutely have to do it, and I don't think this is very efficient, but if you absolutely have to do it, this is how you're going to do it in C# in code, right? So let's implement this. So let's copy our scope code. And let's close this. Okay, let's make this a sync. Okay, now sending bulk emails is done slightly differently from sending a single email, right? So in sending a single email, all you use is the Fluent email interface, this iFluent email interface, right? But in sending bulk emails, where you loop over and keep sending emails, you don't use that. But let me copy this here. You use a different interface, and that is iFluent email factory like this, right? So it's injected into our services the same way. By what we set up here, we can still obtain this, right? Okay, so now we have it, and remember that we are sending an enumerable, so enumerable of strings, right? That's the recipient emails. So what we need to do is to do a for each var recipient in recipient emails. Oh, this spelling is not correct, but well, it's still going to work, right? Okay, then we say var email. All right, let me change this to factory so that it will look different, right? Because this is the factory interface, right? So I'm going to say var email is equal to factory. Then using the Fluent methods, we say create, right? So here you did not create anything, you just used to, but you have to use the Fluent email factory, this interface iFluent email factory, and explicitly create the email you want to send. That is the only way that Fluent email is going to create an email, send it, and then dispose of that email so that the next one it is going to create will be fresh, right? So I've read about people saying they used this method of sending emails, and so this field too did not change. So they looped over a list like this, but they used this method, and for some reason the to field is not recycled. So they are trying to send an email to the next person. Instead, they are sending it to the previous person or the first person that they sent it to. So they keep sending it to the same person. Now, but using this factory interface, you can send these emails without any of those errors, right? So let's do like this, and then to, and so in the to here, to, we are sending it to this recipient, right? So we just specify here recipient, that's the email that was sent, and then the subject, let's say bulk emails from SendGrid, and okay, let's use the HTML template, right? Let's just do this. Let's just copy this and paste here. However, we don't have this recipient name. We did that on purpose. So, but what we can just do here is let's just call this, let's just pass in a string and call it Jon Snow. So the name is Jon Snow. So even though we are sending it to different people, everyone is going to receive Jon Snow. We could just say, hey there, stranger. Yep, right. And it's going to be the same, right? And then we just await email dot send a sync, and that's about that, right? So we are receiving a list or an enumerable of recipient emails, and instead of using the iFluent email interface, we are using the iFluent email factory. We're explicitly creating that factory so that as soon as this loop finishes, right, everything inside will be discarded and then a new one will be created so that the recipient will always be the correct recipient we intended for, right? Okay, so with this, we can now go to, okay, you may remember that we did not test out this and we did not test out this, but that's not necessary. You can just test it out because it's going to work, right? But let's come to our index action and let's comment out this and let's send a bulk email. And to do that, we'll do something like this. Let's do I enumerable of string let's call it send to emails is equals to new list. You know, we have to use a list because this is an interface, right? So we cannot instantiate an interface. So we'll just create a concrete implementation and pass it there. The list implements this IEnumerable, right? Okay, so new list of string and let's open this and say let's pass in kumak@gmail.com, but let's pass in another email, which is another of my emails. I'll pass in kumak@yahoo.com, right? And so I have this. So now we can come and say, we can call that method and MailSender dot SendGrid bulk, and it's expecting an IEnumerable of string. So let's pass in the send to emails. Yes, and that's about that, right? So that's that. So with this, let's run our application and see if it works. Okay, so here we see that our application has built successfully and is running. So let's check out if these emails were sent, right? So let's first go to Gmail. Perfect. So we have it. Remember this? We said, hey stranger, right? Now let's go to Yahoo and see if we've received that email. And so perfect, there it is. We have our email in Yahoo and we have all the formatting and the HTML email, you know, everything we talked about. All right, so we've come to the end of our video, and as a quick recap, what we've done in this video is we've been able to send emails, templated emails with attachments and plain text emails using both SMTP and a transactional email provider. Now, I'm positive that this should cover most of the scenarios, if not all of the scenarios, where you ever need to send an email. However, if there's any way you want to send an email and I've not covered it here, please feel free to comment below and tell me, and I could make another tutorial on that, right? So let me quickly say that the same way you are sending emails here are going to be the same way you're going to send all your other transactional emails. So whether it's going to be an account verification email, or it's going to be like for an e-commerce, there's a purchase and you need to send an invoice to the customer, that's how you're going to send it. If you need to attach an invoice to a customer, that is also how you're going to send the email. So practically what we have done here is to look at almost all the scenarios, right, where you will need to send emails to customers. Thank you for watching my video, and before you leave, please do not forget to subscribe below by clicking the red subscribe button. The source code for this tutorial is located at the link below, and you can also read the blog entry for this video on maxcodingspot.com. See you next time.